Buonasera. My name is Dor Abramson. I am a professor in the Graduate School of Education at the University of California, Berkeley, where I direct a group called Embodied Design Research Laboratory. We investigate how people teach and learn. Our research paradigm, embodied design, involves inventing new technologies for learning mathematical concepts. Our technologies are designed to let students use their natural sensory, motor, and cognitive capacities for interacting with the world. Importantly, students have different capacities for interaction. In the literature, education for students with diverse sensory, motor, and cognitive capacity has been called special education. So we call this area of research Special Education Embodied Design, or SPEED for short. Soon Sophia will tell you more about SPEED. This is a map of the United States, a faraway country between Mexico and Canada. Our talk tonight is a collaboration between 3 labs across the USA. Sophia and I are at the Embodied Design Research Laboratory in Berkeley. Brett is at PhET, a lab for creating digital resources for science and mathematics education. PhET is at the University of Colorado at Boulder. That's really far from Berkeley. It would take Sophia and me almost 19 hours to drive all the way from Berkeley to Boulder. And that's if we didn't stop even once. Our colleagues at PhET are specialists in accessibility for inclusive education. Scott and Jenna are at Chrome, located in St. Louis University. That's even further away from Berkeley. It would take us about 30 hours to get there nonstop. Chrome develops interactive mechatronic resources for haptic perception. Together, our 3 labs, EDRL, PhET, and Chrome, collaborate to build resources for blind and visually impaired students learning mathematics together in inclusive classrooms. We've never all met in person, but we're really glad we can at least meet on Zoom. Tonight's talk is about our first joint product, the Quad, short for Quadrilateral, a haptic digital artifact for blind and visually impaired students to study geometry in inclusive classrooms together with sighted students. As you can see, the Quad is gigantic. It covers most of Canada. We're working on that. Sophia will now tell you more about SPEED, then Scott will present about the development of the Quad with Jenna. And finally, Brett will share his wisdom about technological development for inclusion and accessibility. Following the talk, we will all be glad to take your wonderful questions.
Grazie, Dor. Buonasera a tutti. Sono Sofia Tancredi dall'Embodied Design Research Lab con Dor. Sono felice di tornare a Macerata, sebbene ancora virtualmente. Sospetto che il vostro inglese sia migliore del mio italiano, quindi procederò in inglese. This is our lab's 4th visit to Macerata to speak about different SPEED projects. I'll introduce SPEED and give a quick summary of SPEED work to date, situate the Quad project within the broader SPEED research agenda before handing it over to Scott, who'll tell you more about the Quad itself. So what is SPEED? SPEED is a design-based research framework for imagining more accessible educational experiences for all students. As Dora mentioned, our lab designs tools to let students use their natural sensory, motor, and cognitive capacities for interacting with the world. We call this embodied design because we are always thinking about how students' bodily experiences, actions, and perceptions shape their learning. Thinking doesn't just happen in our heads, it happens with and through our bodies and objects in the world. SPEED focuses on the ways that our bodily experiences can differ from one another. Maybe you're someone who needs to fidget a lot, or you're left-handed, or blind, or deaf, or have cerebral palsy. The work of SPEED is to think about how these differences shape your learning experience and how to design opportunities to use what you know with and through your body as a resource for your learning. Popular educational accessibility frameworks like Universal Design for Learning call for giving students multiple ways to engage, act, express themselves, and represent ideas. SPEED helps identify what different ways matter for what populations to enrich our toolkit to help flexibly serve every learner. Speed can push us to rethink how to offer more effective, more inclusive education to our students, and even rethink the very concepts we teach in new ways. The basic principles of speed are: 1, learning happens through the body's sensory motor engagement with the world. 2, learning begins from learners' existing embodied resources, be it their prior sensory motor experiences, their frequent practices, or their abilities. 3, instruction must flexibly adapt to learners' sensory motor diversities. This last principle takes up disability studies' commitment to celebrate human variation and challenge ideas of what's normal. It puts the onus on us as researchers, educators, and designers to find ways to remove the barriers that our society is currently putting in the way of students with disabilities. Here's a new handbook called Movement Matters: How Embodied Cognition Informs Teaching and Learning, edited by Sheila McCrean and Jennifer Fugate. It comes out on April 19th, where we have a chapter on speed if you want to learn more. To think clearly about how instructional designs invite students to use their bodies, in SPEED we distinguish 3 key design parameters: media, modality, and semiotic mode. To introduce these, let's imagine you want to learn how to build a bed frame from IKEA. A lot of people use the instruction manual provided by the store to do this. Media are the materials you're using. So in this case, it would be a printed instruction booklet with lots of pictures. Modality is what sensory and motor systems you need to use to engage with these media. So here, this would be the visual sensory modality and the manual motor modality. Semiotic mode is the meaning system. In your IKEA booklet, this is mostly a set of diagrams, symbols, and icons. Let's say instead of using the directions, you decide to call your friend who's built one of these bed frames before and invite them to come help. Now the media would be your friend's body. Modalities would now include the auditory modality as your friend talks you through what to do, the visual modality as you watch them model actions, the various motor modalities as you try to mimic them, and maybe your friend will even guide your hand sometimes, engaging the tactile haptic modality. The semiotic modes here might include language, gesture, and bodily actions, so a whole different set of meaning-making resources than when you were using a booklet. In our shelf-building example, each time we used different media, we found that different modalities got involved and different semiotic modes resulted. These 3 parameters mutually affect one another. As another example, deaf and hearing people favor different modalities when communicating, vision versus hearing. The semiotic modes that result, sign language versus spoken language, structure meaning in different ways. When we think about inclusive design in SPEED, we have to consider all 3 of these parameters and how they affect what is available to students to act upon and perceive moment to moment. A SPEED approach has been useful for a range of different populations and problems of practice in education thus far. Some of the original SPEED projects include Balance Board Math, a project of mine that uses the balance modality to support sensory-seeking learners that crave lots of movement in learning about functions and graphing. Christina Krause's SignEd Math project, which integrates the semiotic mode of sign language into the design of tablet activities for learning about ratio and proportion for deaf signers. And Rachel Chen's Magical Musical Mat, which enables non-speaking children on the autism spectrum and their verbal peers to have a symmetrical interaction where they use touch to improvise musical sounds together. SPEED applications have been expanded to even more populations, from students with motor disorders to blind and visually impaired students to students with intellectual disabilities and multiple disabilities, and to a broader set of problems in education, from expressive language to data visualization to arithmetic. For example, Erin Foley's project on accessible data lit uses sonification to enable blind and visually impaired learners and their teachers to create and access sound-based data visualizations. Today's project, the Quad, scales up SPEED in several important ways. It looks to push the boundaries of what current education technologies are capable of, using both tangible and digital media. And while inspired by the embodied resources and practices of blind and visually impaired learners, the goal of the Quad project is to generate a flexible tool that's ready to be used in inclusive education settings with learners of a maximal range of profiles together. seeking to offer a whole range of modalities of engagement, tactile, haptic, kinesthetic, visual, auditory, all together, exploring what this kind of multimodal tool can mean for how students make meaning in geometry and make meaning together. I'll hand it to Scott to really introduce you to the quad.
Thank you so much, Dor and Sophia. So, hello, I'm Scott. I'm a researcher at the Chrome Lab, as Dor mentioned. And I'm going to be talking about the TMQ itself, the tangible manipulative for quadrilaterals. I have one here with me. It's a 3D printed device that's about 5.5 inches square. It's extensible in lengths and variable in angles. So a user, a learner can create all kinds of different quadrilaterals and parallelograms as they interact with the device and explore different shapes. We've created 3 different versions of the device that you can see here. A base TMQ, like the one I have, a smart TMQ that's equipped with a couple extra sensors and features, and the virtual quadrilateral developed by PhET Interactive Simulations mentioned earlier. But I'm going to start by talking about some of the ongoing trends in education before getting into some of the guiding questions that started our work. I'll detail a little bit of the background work, some related work in the area, before talking about how we're founding our research in the ideas of embodied cognition and tangibility, haptics. Then finally, I'll talk about the design of the device itself, the base TMQ, and its validation through user studies. So let's go ahead and get started. In the past couple of decades, and especially so in the last couple of years, we've seen that education has trended towards digital delivery. Online delivery of courses has become the norm, and Zoom classes are ubiquitous. We're doing this over the internet. So it's all become very normal. And things like PDFs, online versions of textbooks are often more accessible, more readily available than their printed counterparts. And this increase in digital delivery, it's matched with a decrease in tangible learning experiences, the idea of learning by doing, kinesthetic learning. And this is particularly detrimental for students with blindness or visual impairments. And so we looked at those trends and we started asking ourselves a few questions. We were curious how we could bring touch back in meaningful ways in these digital online learning experiences and what the role could be of tangibles and peripherals in learning. More broadly, we were curious what the role of tangibility and haptics could play in education, particularly with a mathematics focus. And finally, we were curious what affordances a student would gain with a physical, tangible object and how those affordances might be bolstered or altered by a paired virtual learning experience. While looking at related work, we knew we wanted to emphasize the idea of haptics, the sense of touch through force, while maintaining multimodal inclusivity. So we looked at tangible systems like Hapley Development Platform or HapKit, shown on the images on the right, that demonstrate the robustness and efficacy of haptic tangible systems, particularly for education purposes. And we wanted to maintain a digital and physical connection. So we looked at readily available geometry learning applications to emphasize the pairing of two-dimensional and three-dimensional. And we wanted to focus on the idea of embodied cognition, which is the idea that the act of learning matters to how you learn, to how well you learn. The action of learning matters. Embodied cognition seeks to empower sensorially diverse students by leveraging their modal strengths in learning. And by coupling the physical and digital components, teachers and learners will have access to haptic, visual, and auditory inputs, which allows us to increase the accessibility of these systems. And we chose to specifically look at mathematics and in core to mathematics in geometry. And in geometry, a quadrilateral can serve as a very low complex design to emphasize and elucidate on far-reaching geometric concepts. With a simple four-sided shape, you can demonstrate the idea of angle congruence and 90-degree angles, as well as the idea of parallel lines as you transform between different shapes. A four-sided shape can also demonstrate the idea of shape definitions, such as why all squares are rectangles, but all rectangles aren't necessarily squares. And so with that, we built the TMQ. We built two different versions of it, and I'll detail the base TMQ here. The design process for the base TMQ was really rapid and iterative. It was co-designed with students with visual impairments to ensure an inclusive design from the onset. And we 3D printed these devices to allow for quick testing of various features and sizes. To start, we wanted to explore the idea of transitioning between rectangles and parallelograms, so we created a small palm-sized model that's about 2 inches square, just to demonstrate the idea of those transitions. We expanded on that idea to create a middle-sized model that's about 4 inches square, and looked at what affordances we might gain by changing the cross-section from circular to square so that it can stand up flat, and hands can sit flat on all the sides. And finally, we wanted to see what we might gain by creating a really large version of this that's about 8 inches square and can expand to about 12 inches. So we created a large model that you can see in the image here that allows the student to get both hands across all different parts of the device. And we took those advancements and a little feedback and implemented them into our current design for the base TMQ. It is again about 5 inches square. It's 3D printed. And this video demonstrates just the basic usage of the device, extensible in sides, both top and bottom, and variable in angles along all 4 corners so that a user could rapidly create and transition between parallelograms, rectangles, some rhombuses, even a few right-angled triangles and trapezoids. Additionally, we took some feedback from some of our testing and implemented new features, such as half-inch indentation markers along the sides to serve as tactile length markers so that a learner has access to the length information in a tactile way as they're exploring the device. Additionally, we added locking mechanisms along the corners to allow a student to have more precise length control in their explorations and creations. And so with the current design of the TMQ, we have a device that really emphasizes the idea of tangibility, interactivity, and discovery. As soon as you pick one of these up, you just want to start creating shapes with it and seeing what it can do. And it's a low complex design, just 3 unique parts for the entire thing. And it's 3D printed, so it can be built, it can be printed and assembled in about 1 day. And so with the device we had, we knew we had something that emphasized that idea of interactivity, but we weren't sure how students would interact with it. And so we ran our first user study. We wanted to understand how learners would initially use the device. When given the TMQ, what would they do with it? What core design attributes of the TMQ support user exploration and interaction? And so we ran this first study. We had 7 participants aged 18 to 22 with a range of low vision to total blindness. And the study was ran in 2 parts, the first part being free exploration of the device. What strategies are used when they interact with the device? How do they use it? And what shapes can learners create or identify? And the second part was shape transformations. How do learners and how well do learners transition between different shapes? In that first study, we had a few different free exploration strategies. We were curious if students would use the device with 1 or 2 hands. Would they keep the device on the tabletop or lift it up and explore it in the space in front of them? Would they rotate the device and flip it around to see what affordances they might gain that way? And finally, would they mirror their hand motions such that what the left hand does, the right hand follows? Or would they have individual actuations so that each hand sort of explored the device in different ways? And after their initial exploration, we asked the learners to identify the shapes that they were creating and to create and identify as many shapes as they could. And so in that first part, exploration, rectangles and parallelograms were the most common, which makes sense. They're pretty simple to create. Overall, most learners, 5 of 7, mirrored their hand motions as a dominant exploration method during the study. And you can see that in the first image on the right. What the student is doing is copying both hand motions on the corners of the device, pulling at it to create that diamond. All learners at some point used one hand as stabilization at the corner. You can see that in that bottom left image, what the left hand is stabilizing, the right hand is then pushing and interacting with. And finally, nearly all, 6 of 7, used the device flat on the table with both hands across the entire device, as this was the quickest way and easiest way to garner a global understanding of the configuration of the device and the shapes they were creating. And in that second part, the transformations were a little bit more delineated. The first task was to go and create any rectangle and then transform that rectangle into any parallelogram. A couple students noted that a rectangle is already a parallelogram, but knew what we were after and went ahead and tilted the device to create a parallelogram. And all students were able to do this. This was a straightforward task, so this was met with full success. The next task was to mirror the parallelogram so that if it tilted to the left, the mirrored parallelogram would then tilt to the right. This was a little bit more challenging. Most students needed a little more explanation as to what we meant by mirroring a parallelogram. And then once understood, it was often completed in several disconjuncted steps. The students would often shrink it back to the base size, go back to this base square, tilt it the other way, and then expand back rather than just mirroring it in one smooth motion. One student did note that you could mirror the parallelogram by just flipping it over, which we accepted because it is indeed mirroring the parallelogram. And finally, the last task was enlarging a square to take the base configuration of the device and create a square as large as possible. And we did ask the students to complete these tasks in as smooth a motion as possible, and this task was the most imperfect on that front. It's relatively difficult to smoothly expand all 4 sides of the device. And most students discovered that in this transformation and often completed the task by expanding the top and bottom and then the side lengths and then checking for right angles along the corners. But overall, a response from this study was highly positive. A lot of students saying something along the lines that they wish they had this in their geometry course. A few had just completed a geometry course and were sad that they hadn't delayed their course a semester so that they could have something like this in their courses. Overall, we saw that two-handed exploration of the device was the dominant strategy, which makes sense as it's the quickest way to get the most information out of the device. And we got a lot of good recommendations from the participants for the design of the TMQ, such as those locking mechanisms and indentations that I mentioned earlier. And a couple students touch on the idea of uniform resistance, such that expanding the sides and changing the angles requires the same amount of effort to do. And so we started looking into that as well. We had a strong validation of our design basis. We saw that extensible lengths and variable angles yield high interactivity and emphasize discovery. We saw that tangibles can indeed bolster digital learning, which Brett will talk about more in just a sec. We got a lot of usage insights as well. We saw that two-handed, on-table exploration was dominant, and side-based interaction over corner-based interaction was also noted, as most students gripped onto the sides of the device. We got a lot of good ideas for improvements to the base TMQ, such as dynamic non-visual feedback, adding little coin vibration motors so we can have vibration when right angles are achieved, or sonification for different tasks. And so with that, we have several ongoing efforts with that. We're looking at creating an actuated quad, an actuated TMQ, so that what one student creates in one location is replicated on another device to enable peer-to-peer learning. We're looking at expanding on the idea of a TMQ or a quad to create a modular quadrilateral that's no longer a quadrilateral, to expand on the types of shapes that are not limited to just 4 sides. And we're also enhancing our 2D and 3D multimodal learning system, that simulation pairing, that I'll actually pass off to Brett to talk about more now. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Hello, everyone. My name is Brett Fiddler. I work with the PhET Interactive Simulations Project as an inclusive STEM education researcher at the University of Colorado at Boulder. I'll detour us just briefly from the quad to introduce PhET simulations and our views and efforts towards inclusively designing educational technology. The PhET project began in 2002 with a small set of physics simulations for use in lectures to over 150 science and math simulations used over 200 million times by educators and students across all grade levels worldwide. They have been translated into over 93 languages by volunteers. All simulations and materials are free and open source. The project itself operates as a bridge between educational technology, STEM learning, and accessibility design and research. In addition to the simulations themselves, our website, PhET.colorado.edu, provides many resources for educators in the form of guides, teacher-designed activities, and more for each simulation. I have listed the design features that are shared by all of our simulations that frame the learning experience. It's important to keep these in mind as they present a design challenge when we start considering modalities outside of the traditional visual design. The sims are designed to be highly interactive, to provide real-time feedback, to allow actions that are difficult or impossible in real life, to include multiple representations, to be intuitive to use, and uniquely, to implicitly scaffold inquiry. That is, that its design supports and encourages learners to explore and discover toward scientific reasoning without providing direct answers. Within PhET, we have a team of folks dedicated to the design, implementation, and research of multimodal features, meaning different modes of display and input for interactive learning tools. We've established a mission of creating the most enjoyable, inclusive learning experiences at scale. Our pathway to accomplish this is through accessible interactive STEM tools, and our process along this path is through the use of inclusive co-design, publishing inclusive features at scale, and with a diverse team of experts and collaborators. Our view on inclusive design sees disability as a mismatch between a person and their environment, which we frame as a design challenge. A one-size-fits-one approach, so our goal is flexibility. So each simulation can be adapted to meet the needs of the teacher, learner, or learners, making use of the learning tool in the moment so that the outcome is an inclusive technology. Designed through diverse collaboration at multiple levels, and we seek to investigate and understand individuals and edge cases through participatory research. And we think about scale in multiple ways when it comes to accessibility. We envision, design, develop, study, and publish new multimodal features for accessible and inclusive PhET sims for use on a global scale. And we also develop design practices and associated learning materials to share these practices through things like online courses such as MOOCs. We conduct and publish academic research in STEM education, accessibility, and computer science to share widely the knowledge of what we're developing. In our software development, we follow web accessibility standards to be compatible with many assistive technologies. And when needed, we further develop software architectures within our own open source code base so that others can take up not only the designing the sims, but also our design practices, our software code, and to create their own accessible interactives. All of this is intended to be high quality, free, and openly licensed for use by anyone. So let's take a look at the scope of sensory access points into modern technologies for educational tech. From the input side, so how we interact with it, visually we have gaze, auditorily we have speech, physically and for touch we have alternative inputs like keyboard, physical peripherals, gesture, and tangibles like the quad. On the display side of things, visually we have text and graphics that may be perceived. Auditorily, we have verbalized text description or nonverbal sound that may be perceived. In touch, we have text, haptics, and tangible displays. All of these as possible access points for our learners with sensory, cognitive, or physical disabilities, or without disabilities experiencing situational challenges with various learning preferences, or those who just may find things more immersive. So as we go through our inclusive design process and research, we assess what parts or how much of the learning experience each modality can take on. How can we take advantage of the affordances of any given mode for the learning experience? So through ongoing research and design with learners of every age and with collaborators like the wonderful folk who spoke before me, we arrive at the current landscape of PhET's research into inclusive features for interactive STEM learning tools that we're working tirelessly to incorporate into new and existing simulations. This includes alternative input through traditional means such as keyboard or switch access, mobile gesture paired with interactive description through iOS voiceover. We're working on custom tangible input like the quad, which we'll get back to in a moment. In auditory display, we have interactive descriptions for screen reader users, a new embedded voicing feature that provides auditory description without the need for a screen reader, and nonverbal sound effects and sonifications. Visually, we have pan and zoom features as well as interactive highlights for focused objects. And on the haptic display, we have ongoing work for developing vibratory feedback as well as other haptic feedback with collaborators such as the Chrome Lab. So we built toward the notion that the learning experience can be something more beyond the visual display. Rather than just adding to each other, we lean on the different sensory domains, each providing conceptual information to be combinable and interchanged to meet the needs of learners. For example, we could have sounds and auditory display combined with the visual display, or something without the screen display at all with a tangible hands-on interface and auditory display, or some combination of all three depending on the needs of the user. So what does this have to do with the quad then? Well, it has absolutely everything to do with the quad. When we first dreamed up the quad, we imagined it would provide robust multimodal feedback, scaffolding a learner toward exploration of quadrilateral properties through coordinated action. Properties such as angle congruence, length congruence, and so on, all explored through movement, sound, speech, haptics, and more. We anticipated supporting this new tangible input, as well as more standard inputs like multi-touch on a touchscreen. And for the first time, with the quad quite literally in hand, we began a novel design process of creating a sim with no visual display through several of its early iterations. That brings us to today. So I'll briefly show where we're at with the virtual representation of the quadrilateral. Progress towards all of the inclusive features, such as auditory description, is ongoing, that which would describe what is happening on the screen with the quadrilateral. But we already have quite a bit ready to interface with the tangible quad, including sounds and sonifications to explore the shape transformations within the quadrilateral family. This particular version of the simulation guides a learner towards exploring parallelograms. When we bring the tangible quad into the equation, we are creating a virtual, physical coupled ecosystem that inputs learner movement, communicates and translates it into updated sim information, and provides multiple avenues of feedback, from sounds and sonifications and auditory description in the form of speech afforded by the simulation, and a wide variety of haptic feedback afforded by the physical device. Our goal is to accomplish this in as scalable a manner as possible, focusing on using hobbyist-level hardware with freely and publicly available schematic files, code, and startup guides. It will enable simple integration with the already open-source PhET sim, thus enabling folks to create their own custom devices if they so choose. Scott can provide more details if anybody does have questions, but iterations have brought us on one side to a sensor-driven device, providing exact length and angle readings using simple electronic sensors and easily obtained microcontrollers, all of which are capable of communicating with the simulation over Bluetooth or serial connections to a personal computer. This configuration opens up exploration with or without a screen nearby. We are also exploring completely wireless strategies, harnessing the power of open source image detection libraries. This is useful for contexts where a webcam may be available, but Bluetooth or robust connections to the device are not. At this stage, we continue to make progress toward a fully customizable experience where a learner may choose to enable any set of features for the quadrilateral that create the most useful and enjoyable experience for them, whether that be just the tangible interface, just the screen display, or any combination along with any of the other optional modal feedback. So with that, we encourage you to share our future imaginary, where what if learning tools were as multimodal as learners? Learning tools could flex and adapt to meet the needs of teachers and learners in the moment. Learning tools were designed with and by learners with diverse needs, and learners' sensory, mobility, or cognitive diversity and the different perspectives that brings was used and valued in the learning experience. So that is all for us here. A big thanks to our hosts for this opportunity, to you for listening, and of course to my brilliant collaborators. Please reach out if you're as excited as we are about what we do, and we're happy to take any questions. Thanks.